hearty good evening to one and all. Welcome to episode 3 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. Now, the posters behind me all represent, well, some of my favorite films, yes, but movies that are important to me in some maybe intrinsic way or something more than just, I really like this movie, I really hate this movie, oh, this is one of my favorites. If each one has a kind of greater representation, has made a greater imprint on my psyche, and in some ways even how I, weird as it might be, how I lived my life, the things I did and didn't do. So, Blue Velvet, one of the most notorious mainstream films ever made, a brutally violent, emotionally violent, physically violent, psychologically very destructive kind of movie. But a great film, one of my favorites for sure, and that's not going to be the topic for discussion today. Just figured I would show it to you. This is one of those films, you like psychological thrillers, you're okay with them being a little dirty, a la Seven, in that ballpark. Hell, even Silence of the Lambs, Get Out. Blue Velvet's in that category. If you like that kind of film, you should look it up. Maybe you'll take to it the way that I did. Over here we have an 11 by 17 for the original Dirty Harry, Clint Eastwood, the movie that pretty much solidified his superstar status, playing San Francisco homicide inspector Harry Callahan in a film which was a big box office hit and spawned 4 sequels. So there were Dirty Harry films made from 1971 until 1988. So a franchise, we talk about franchises, Expendables kind of petering out. This franchise lasted 17 years. And until the 5th one, which is a pretty good movie, The Deadpool, the first 4 were all substantial box office hits. This movie is now 52 years old, almost. It'll be 52 in December. And the tagline, they make a mistake. He's not a detective, he's an inspector. But it says, Detective Harry Callahan, you don't assign him to murder cases. You just turn him loose. And that's pretty nervy for 50 plus years ago. It shows that the creative people, marketing teams, even back then, in the kind of safer era in some ways, certainly Hollywood has gotten a lot more raw over time. That's a pretty nervy tagline, though. You got to give it up for the WB back then. Now right here, of course, we have another one of the all-time greats, 1994's Pulp Fiction. The movie that, I can say it, should have won Best Picture over Forrest Gump, and dare I say it, even over a movie I absolutely adore, The Shawshank Redemption. They were all from that same year. But if you ask me what was the best film of 1994, I'm always going to say Pulp Fiction. And this was a movie that in the pre-social media era, I read about this long before it came out in the United States. It won the best film at the Cannes Film Festival. And coincidence or not, the chairman of the jury at the Cannes Film Festival, is it called chairman or president? I apologize, I'm not 100%. But that year, the chairman of the Cannes Film Festival was this guy, Clint Eastwood. And he lobbied for it to win the Palme d'Or, which is the French equivalent of the Best Picture Oscar at the Academy Awards. It's actually more prestigious. But Quentin Tarantino's second film, Reservoir Dogs being his first, ended up winning the grand prize, the big prize at the Cannes Film Festival in 1994. So people like me were waiting for this movie to be released in the United States for however many months. There was no streaming. There was nobody had a bootleg, or maybe somebody had a bootleg. I certainly didn't see one. And saw it in theaters the night it opened at the Comac Multiplex, a theater which has long since gone the way of the dodo, just off Long Island Expressway, exit 53. I can still see it. But a great film, and one that I will revisit, every couple of years, and never ceases to dazzle me. Now, if you ask me what's my favorite Tarantino film, I'm going to give you an unusual, somewhat off-the-wall answer. I'm going to say Kill Bill. But Pulp Fiction is fantastic cinema, and as I say, I believe that it should have won Best Picture. As much as I love, as we say, Shawshank and Forrest Gump. I'm not a hater. I love Forrest Gump. I love Hanks and Sinise and the whole cast, Robin Wright, Sally Field. They're all great, but there were two better films in 1994. And down here, another iconic, Star Wars Episode 4, or as it was known when I was a kid, Star Wars. They didn't really start getting into the Roman numeral aspect until they're like, oh, we're going to make more than 4, 5, and 6. But good old 1977 Star Wars, may the Force be with you. A film that I didn't get to see until I was 9 years old. Because when you were growing up in the early 80s, the only way to see a movie was how? In a theater, or if it happened to be airing on television at the time that you were at home. Hey, it's on HBO at 2 p.m. today. I'm going to watch it. Oh, we have to go to the dentist? Fuck! More or less the experience of every Gen Xer in their 40s now, maybe in their 50s. But the reality, didn't see it till I was 9. There was no process by which I could have seen it until I was 9, and it premiered on good old HBO at 8 p.m. on a Saturday night. And I watched it on a 13-inch TV, ladies and gentlemen, without enhanced sound. And you know what? I fucking loved it anyway. I had heard about the movie for years, and it played brilliantly. Just like I dreamed it would. Sometimes, when you have huge expectations, they are not dashed. They're actually exceeded. And it's true to say that in the case of Star Wars, in the case of Pulp Fiction, not so much Dirty Harry. It was different. I was expecting to like it because I was already a Clint Eastwood fan. And Blue Velvet, I was also expecting to like. I had read about it in a book called Cult Movies 3. So I knew that there were a lot of people who absolutely adored Blue Velvet, almost to the level of Rocky Horror Picture Show, where back in the early 90s you had people screaming Dennis Hopper as Frank Booth, yelling his dialogue and back and forth, don't you fucking look at me! Where's my bourbon, you shithead? Imagine, that would be great, watching a movie where you're shouting back at the audience those lines of it. Heineken, fuck that shit! Pabst Blue Ribbon! But as I often do, I digress. The final film on my wall is the one that I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about in episode 3. Rounders, a kind of neo-noir set in the New York City of the late 1990s. And again, I mentioned last time, I always enjoyed cinematic representations of the city that many of us know and have always loved. Whether or not you lived there, or in my case, went to school there, New York University, Lower Manhattan. But I really enjoy seeing the living, breathing New York City, the city that never sleeps, and how it's represented in films of the 70s, such as Marathon Man, 3 Days of the Condor, Annie Hall, Manhattan, movies like that, even Serpico, and films of the 80s, Ghostbusters, and Legal Eagles, another Ivan Reitman film, Crossing Delancey, films in that ballpark, Tootsie, that just show different aspects of the city at a particular point in time. And Rounders was shot in early 1998, so 25 plus years ago. And it's not a film where, I was following the production all the way. I really wasn't. I already considered myself a fan of both Edward Norton and Matt Damon. Edward Norton had done, he was in the midst of doing American History X. I believe it came out later that year. But Edward Norton had been in Primal Fear with Richard Gere and Laura Linney, a terrific psychological thriller where he showed massive levels of acting range and an ability to essentially create two characters out of whole cloth and sell them both. And he was terrific in People vs. Larry Flint, which got an Oscar nomination for Woody Harrelson, and another Milos Forman film. But a movie that I feel is underrated by history is Larry Flint. And John Malkovich, Teddy KGB himself. I've got 2 Teddy KGB shirts. One of my favorite supporting performances of all time, Malkovich as a Russian mobster. And I was a huge Malkovich fan already because of Empire of the Sun, and especially In the Line of Fire, where he co-starred with Clint Eastwood, and more than holds his own. When we talk about Clint, you talk about a guy who has screen presence that is off the charts, that even as an older actor, in films like The Mule, in films like Gran Torino, Clint holds the screen like almost no one else. Harrison Ford has that ability, John Wayne had that ability, Gary Cooper, but you're talking about very select few that when you see them, when they're on screen, your eyes are automatically drawn to them. It's a quality that can't be bottled up, it can't be bought. You either got it or you don't. And Mr. Eastwood, 93 years old, God bless him, still working, making a movie called Juror Number 2 as we speak, has it. But Malkovich almost steals In the Line of Fire from Clint because he's so good as CIA assassin who decides that he wants to assassinate somebody on our side, quote unquote, and was nominated for supporting actor that year, lost to Tommy Lee Jones, a brilliant actor who was great in The Fugitive, but Malkovich should have won that award. It was a trickier performance. You still somewhat empathized with Mitch Leary, as horrendous as he was, because you understood this was a guy who put his faith in the people above him, and they screwed him over, tried to eliminate him, and he said, you know what, fuck you, I'm not playing no more. John Turturro at bottom left, another terrific actor, going back to the 80s. He was in Miller's Crossing, a lot of great movies. Before this, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou with George Clooney a little bit later. But he's a guy you can always count on to give, kind of a quirky, distinctive type of a performance, and he certainly does so in Rounders. The reason why, other than the fact that it's just a really good story, it feels like a mystery, but it's not really a mystery. It's a sports film. It's a Rocky movie for all intents and purposes, where you have the kind of underdog, in this case Matt Damon, who is outgunned, almost literally, outmanned and outmoneyed, and is at grave risk. He's such a young man. He plays a law student, Damon. It was supposed to be NYU, but my alma mater didn't really want to be involved with a film that dealt with the sort of New York City underworld and Russian mobsters. We don't know no Russian like that kind of thing. So he went to City Law University instead of New York University. It could have even been Columbia, but it was supposed to be NYU. And he's a law student who really wants to be a professional poker player. And as every young gambler, me, in my case, it was blackjack that I thought that I could make a career out of. There is always that fantasy that you could make a life and make a living, and a good living, not working. But the John Turturro character is in this movie to point out that that's not really true. That, yeah, I play for money, he says. I play poker. I put my kids through college. And the Edward Norton character, who is somewhat antagonistic to Turturro, points out, he's working, bro. Don't think that he's not working. It might not be pushing a cab or laying bricks, but he's working just the same. There's no glory in what he's doing. The Rounders is about a young man who has to accept the fact that he wasn't cut out to be a lawyer, but he might be cut out to be the best poker player around and somebody who could possibly win a World Series of poker. It's sort of cockeyed that the goal is to be a great, successful professional gambler and not a great, successful attorney. So give the movie credit for turning a lot of stuff on its head, as they say. But I grew up playing poker. I did not play blackjack as a child. I did not play that many other card games, maybe a little rummy or gin rummy. But my mom's mom, Grandma Gertrude, who was a lounge singer who supposedly knew Sinatra and went by the stage name of Gloria Dennis. Some of her stuff you could actually find on YouTube. She spent a lot of her life, we're talking about the 1930s and 40s, in clubs, in bars, in what used to be called speakeasies, I would imagine. And she played a lot of poker. And she's the one who taught me how to play poker. Every variation that she knew, from 5-card draw, 5-card stud, 7-card stud, 7-card baseball. Ironically, the only version of poker that she did not teach me is one that she never played, which is the game that is played in 80% of the poker scenes, if not more, in this movie, Texas Hold'em, which is now the dominant version of poker everywhere. You go to a poker room in Atlantic City, and at least 3/4 of the tables. You're going to have some people playing Omaha, and the last time I walked through the Borgata, you had some 7-card stud tables, and occasionally you'll find a 5-card stud. But generally speaking, the big tournaments are Texas Hold'em, and sometimes PLO, Pot Limit Omaha, which is generally how it works. And this movie, although it was not a huge hit at the box office, it turned a profit. But given the fact that the reviews were solid, the acting is terrific, and it's a little bit of a dirtier, grittier New York City than some of the other films that I mentioned, it was not a huge hit at the box office, but it had a lot of people talking about poker, and people like myself who had only played other styles, other poker variants, suddenly all we wanted to do was play Texas Hold'em. And it slowly began a trickle which turned into a poker boom. And the movie didn't directly do what I'm about to tell you, because they had been having a World Series of Poker and telecasting it, broadcasting it on ESPN for many years. It didn't really take off until an executive at ESPN, I believe, I don't know his name, or her name for that matter, but somebody figured out a way to, when they were going to have what they call a feature table, where you have 9 players that maybe it's deep in the tournament, or maybe it's somebody, hey, it's Phil Hellmuth, hey, look, Daniel Negreanu, Phil Ivey, hey, Jen Harmon, whoever it might be. When they're at that table, it's TV time. They figured out a way to put cameras inside the felt. Doesn't seem that wacky of an idea, but nobody had thought of it until the 2003 World Series of Poker. By doing that, we saw what the players at those featured tables had. What are the 2 cards that Phil Ivey is holding? Well, what's Negreanu got? Oh my God, Ivey's got ace, and Daniel has KK. Oh my goodness gracious, Daniel's going to be knocked out of the tournament, or whatever it is. But by being able to do that, by having the camera and seeing what the players were holding, it lets the audience play along. Where we say, hey, what would I do? I've got ace-king, and I've got 15 big blinds. I'm under the gun. I think I've got a jam. But if you can't see what the under-the-gun player has, you're not even going to... So it added a tremendous amount of excitement to the viewing experience. And things really took off. And then online poker became an enormous success, and there were a lot of issues. Full Tilt Poker, there was a huge scandal where it took years for them to get back huge amounts of money. But this movie was critical in the development of online poker and the so-called poker boom. And this is a little bit of how you talk about people using props. So this right here is a trophy that I won in not an enormous event, a relatively significant event at Global Poker. That's one of the sites. In New York State, it's really the only one that you're allowed to play legally, for real money. And it was 3 years ago, November, that I took down this tournament, Global Poker, for the Eagle Cup, Part 4, Year 4, whatever it was. And something like that probably there wouldn't be this many poker sites, or that many as there are now, without the success of the movie Rounders. And it was personalized, engraved, all that. Yep, this is true. But as a theatrical experience, Rounders is, and look, it could have been about poker, the movie could have sucked, right? It's not that crazy. There was a film with Eric Bana from about maybe 9 years later called Lucky You. And it also dealt with poker. It was loosely based on a super successful player who ended up winning the World Series, Huck Seed. That movie should have worked. You had Bonner and great Robert Duvall as his father. Drew Barrymore was in it. The film just didn't work. It just wasn't that good. Rounders, if anything, is to me even better than its reputation, because you go on Rotten Tomatoes, the reviews are pretty good, but I think that it's a notch below a masterpiece. It gets into the psychology. It gets into the fact that there are certain people who are degenerate gamblers who happen to be brilliant poker players. And then there are people who may have addictive kind of personalities, but are not degenerates. And without putting names to it, without spelling it out, without pandering to the audience, this movie makes a lot of really good points about life, about addiction, about recovery, and about sometimes your calling is not what you expect. And the movie argues that if you think that your future is doing what Matt Damon is doing, you have the skill for it, this is what you want to do, take your shot. Take your shot. And in the movie, his character takes his shot twice. And I won't say which time he wins, which time he loses, but it wouldn't be a movie if all he did was succeed. But it's a film, again, that I can watch. If you told me I had to watch it once a week for the rest of my life, okay, no problem. And Damon was coming off a couple of already very high-profile, in fact, high-profile films, one of which he was a supporting player, Courage Under Fire, which was an Edward Zwick film about the early 90s Gulf War. And there was a story I literally just read yesterday, it might have come across some of your feeds, about Denzel Washington. And it was one of those teasers where I figured out what movie they were talking about, but I wasn't sure which actor. And it said something about, the future star that Denzel Washington was intimidated by. And it showed a still from what looked like Courage Under Fire. So in this movie, Courage Under Fire, Matt Damon plays, I believe he's Air Force, and somebody that had seen some really bad shit in combat and was traumatized and had lost a ton of weight. And his character is interviewed as part of the investigation that Denzel's character is putting forth to try to figure out if a certain character in the film, should they get CMH, should they be honored, or how should we handle this? Did this person act heroically or not? And Damon is so small and thin and scrawny in his role. It's kind of scary. He looks like he's in danger. And he even talked about it, this is Damon. He didn't do a medically supervised diet. He just on his own lost a ton of weight. And he was a guy who was already fit to begin with. And he said, I could have permanently damaged myself. I was very lucky that I made a full recovery. But the story goes that Denzel did a take of the scene in which he's interviewing Damon's character. And the tape was a little bit off. And the director yelled cut. And Denzel put up his hand or whatever he did with Damon. Excuse me, kid, I got to talk with the director. And the director said, are you okay? Denzel, you all right? And he said, I wasn't expecting, this kid's really good. I'm going to have to up my game. Now, I doubt that Matt Damon knew that Denzel said that at the time, but that's about as high praise as you're going to get from somebody. Now, again, this is the Denzel from the 90s, so it's not, the kind of elder statesman who's still fantastic today. But the fact that Denzel was so impressed that he was floored and was backpedaling during a scene and needed to kind of get himself right so that he could match this guy, that's impressive. So there was actually some Oscar buzz for Damon for Courage Under Fire. It didn't happen. But then the following year, 97, the year before Rounders, he had an incredible 1-2 punch. 2 movies. I actually saw them both in theaters at the good old Broadway Mall, Hicksville. Both films where he played leads, both films where he played intelligent guys. Oddly enough, the first of the two, The Rainmaker, is a Francis Coppola film with an incredible cast. He does something that he ends up not doing in Rounders. He's an attorney. He's a young lawyer who gets an insurance case and runs with it. And it's really good for a courtroom thriller kind of thing with a lot of other, things happening at the same time. It's a terrific movie. It's probably the best film Coppola made in the 90s, I would think for sure. He didn't work as much, but it doesn't necessarily have the sort of Coppola stamp, except for the fact that he pulled Mickey Rourke out of semi-obscurity to play Danny DeVito and Matt Damon's boss in Rainmaker. But Rainmaker is a terrific film. If you like those kinds of courtroom thrillers, mystery-type movies, excellent. And Damon is terrific. Rudy Baylor, that was the name of his character. And John Voight, as only the John Voight of the 90s, just chewing scenery like nobody's business. You know, Anaconda, that wacky movie with J-Lo and Ice Cube, same year. And Voight does the same shtick where he's just, every scene, he's just taking it and he's running with it. But Damon matches him. He's really good. Danny Glover is good as a judge. And DeVito is always fantastic. DeVito's DeVito, right? But the biggest film, and arguably the biggest film in Matt Damon's career, was also 97. It came out a little bit after The Rainmaker, I believe. I know that it was made before The Rainmaker, Good Will Hunting. And Good Will Hunting put Matt Damon over the top as far as being a star. Not, again, to the Clint Eastwood level that I was talking about with Dirty Harry, but Good Will Hunting showed that Damon had tremendous range. He wasn't just a good-looking guy with a great voice. He was somebody that could play a lot of emotions and sell it. And Ben Affleck is great in the movie. Minnie Driver is terrific. And the film got, Oscar nominations all over the place. I don't know how many. I know that Robin Williams won for supporting actor, and he's amazing in the film. But that's what set up Matt Damon, I believe, to even get Rounders. I think he got Rounders off of that. It could have been The Rainmaker. The point is, his career was already rolling. And I think of Damon now, he's aged very gracefully. I don't think of him as like an old guy, but he's like 26, 27 years old in that picture from Rounders, give or take. And it is a film that it's on my list. It's an important movie, and I think it's terrific. And it is a film because of the way I grew up with my grandma, us playing poker, whether it was in St. Croix or at the old house in Massapequa. The cliche, we're just playing for pennies, we're playing for nickels, we're playing for dimes, but at the end of the game, nobody was taking anyone's money. We were just playing for fun, and as they say in baseball, we were playing for the love of the game. So in other podcasts, I will probably go into more detail about these other films, and there are a few more posters of movies that are very near and dear to me that I'm sure we'll go into. But I think that's it. That's it for episode number 3. Give you an idea of, for better or worse, the kinds of movies that have made a deep impression on me, and why Rounders is one of them. Because in the history of film, no offense to John Dahl's movie and the great actors that populated it, it's not in the same league as these other films. But don't love it any less. And I guarantee you, if you watch Rounders, you'll like it. It's one of those films like very few people think. Sammy Hoffman is not a big fan of this movie. Sammy's watching this. He's telling me, I don't like that movie. I couldn't believe it. He's telling me we're on cardio. He was telling me he couldn't stand the movie or that he's not a fan. But it's super entertaining, especially because Malkovich steals every scene he's in as Teddy KGB, this kind of Russian mobster who's just a poker wizard that you don't in any way want to mess with. But of course, if Damon doesn't mess with him, you don't have any movie. One more thing, though, a funny moment in the film, which was timely back then, but now is just a sort of a curiosity, is that Damon is, at a certain point early in the film, is driving a truck. And he goes into a convenience store, and the actor who was in a ton of movies, I think his name is Lenny Veneto, is the clerk at the store. And he knows that Matt Damon's character, Mike McDermott, is a law student. And he goes, "Hey, Mike, can fucking Steinbrenner just fucking move the Yankees?" Or something like that. And Matt Damon, he looks right at him, he says, I don't know. We don't get to Steinbrenner until the next term of law school. And the guy's like, oh. And I remember watching it back then, because that was a discussion. Could Steinbrenner just move the Yankees? Fortunately, he didn't. They ended up getting a new stadium. But that's the kind of timely humor that was hilarious in the late 90s that now people would be like, what the heck does that mean? What are they talking about? Anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. This has been episode 3 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. Have a good night, everyone.